Hi there. I think I've done that now. We've gone live on Facebook as well. Sorry, we had a bit of a hiccup there. Hi. Hi there. It's Gemma from OCAD. Today we're being joined by Kieran, our expert painter, artist who does lots of work with us here at OCAD. So we're going to talk about his work. I'm going to just flash up something here just to get you all very excited about what sort of thing that Kieran does. Yes, these are paintings. I want to hear all about these in a minute from Kieran. So OCAD, Kieran does a lot of work with our recreation students, so students that come to us who want to learn specific skills, and then they're put in touch with Kieran, who can give them expert advice. You'll see on our YouTube channel endless videos and demonstrations from Kieran, who weekly will put up videos and tips and all sorts of great stuff. So feel free, go to our YouTube channels and check out all these videos and use them. Kieran helps us with the free online tuitions that we give as well through our social media platforms. So do reach out to us that way as well. So let me bring Kieran into the chat so we can hear from him. Let me remove that and he'll show us the real thing. Hi, Kieran.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, great. So me and Kieran had a little chat before we came in. So we're going to kind of repeat all of that and find out how, Kieran, you got into what you do. So where should we start? Should we go back or should we show what you do now? How would you like to start it off?
Can maybe show like a bit of, well, that piece that you showed.
Yes,
just before.
please. So you've got it there, have you?
It's a bit of an extension. Yeah, so I've got, these are like those two paintings are very recent. So I think I posted them on Instagram about maybe 3 days ago or something like that. So they're actually still drying.
They're still drying?
Yeah, so I've got, they're due for like an exhibition in New York, sort of a group show coming up in March. So I'm sort of finishing them off and drying them. They were painted with this kind of particular old frame, this kind of antique frame. I've got a pair of them, the other one's over somewhere else, but they were kind of designed with these frames in mind. So I've been doing work recently where I kind of buy and collect old frames and then sort of design paintings for them specifically.
Yeah. So, how long does that take you, something like that?
It varies slightly. I would maybe say from start to finish, including setting up and kind of getting the lighting and picking sort of the particular colors. Like obviously these two, this one has a sort of cool secondary light, so more of a bluish secondary light, and then the other one has a much warmer secondary light.
Are you setting these up? I mean, do you have a skull there? I mean, how do you do it?
Yeah, so I've got, I don't know if you can vaguely see in the back of my studio bits of skulls and plaster casts and stuff like that. So yeah, my preference is always to work from life. I always find it easier to work. It's also my background, which we'll get into, I guess, a little down the line of the chat. But I actually find it easier to work from life just because you get more information than working from photographs. But I do sometimes work from photographs as well if necessary.
Yeah.
But yeah, those ones are kind of set up in my studio in different places. But yeah, I'm just kind of waiting for them to dry sufficiently enough.
What about New York? You pop that in there as if that was a very casual thing, but that's a big deal. I mean, New York, how did that come about?
Just through Instagram, actually. I mean, nowadays most of my work comes through Instagram. So I've got a reasonably large profile built up. Which I guess I've been kind of building over 6, maybe 7 or 8 years now that I've been on there. So you kind of get people, you do paintings and then people see it who are at galleries or people connected to galleries. And then you tend to just get, I mean, a lot of the time nowadays just cold called or, I mean, I sell quite a lot of work through Instagram as well. It's a really good platform for artists. I think it's really starting to revolutionize how artists connect with buyers. So in the past, galleries were always I guess like gatekeepers for the clientele who would buy work, and the artist would be kind of kept behind the gallery. Whereas nowadays you can find an artist that you like on Instagram and just send them a message and see if you can buy a piece directly from them.
We do actually get a lot of emails through from seeing just our student work on Instagram. I must say that's kind of normally how people get in touch and want to reach out to the students, kind of ask them what they're doing next, and colleges and unis and stuff like that. So yeah, I agree. I think it's a great platform. So you don't really advertise yourself other than that. It's not like you're reaching out.
Yeah, not really. I've never, for my own artwork, I've never really done any advertising whatsoever. So it's kind of just passive putting stuff out there and having people respond to it. I think particularly with visual art, it's so easy to spread it on Instagram because Instagram is inherently a visual platform. I think it's easier than, say, being a musician where you have to get people to listen to your stuff actively. If people are scrolling through Instagram and they see something they like, they can just immediately follow you. So it's always been really good that way. But yeah, I've got, I think 3 separate people or galleries or people I've worked with in New York have come through Instagram. So I've got no direct connections there, just them finding it online.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. So you've done lots of exhibitions though. That's not like your first, is it? You've been doing this for a while?
Yeah, so I've been exhibiting since I finished studying when I was probably about like 21 or so. So I studied in Florence, and immediately, pretty much out of finishing there, I'm from Perth in Australia originally. So I went back there briefly after being in Italy for about 3 years. So I went to Italy when I was 17, just about to turn 18.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's sort of straight out of high school that I went and studied.
Yeah.
And the first show I did was mostly work, or a mixture of work that I'd made at school and then some extra figure drawings at the time, which was what I was working on afterwards. And so from there, I've just always
hard to get into Florence. I mean, did you have to have like really high level skills at that point? Would you say that you were really quite refined in your ability at that point, or is it kind of almost accessible to?
It was, at the time, it was pretty accessible. I think things have changed a bit now because there's a lot more awareness of the fact that you can go to these atelier schools and learn 19th. So what I did was I went to this sort of classical atelier. They based themselves on 19th century French academy type teaching. So the curriculum was just totally vocational. Everything was working from life every day for like 6 hours. You'd work. Half the time you'd work from an inanimate subject. So you would start with copies of these things called barg plates, which are kind of like classically rendered versions of sculptures from various collections. Copy them in pencil. And you basically would have to finish a project up to a standard that the teacher was happy with. Then they would let you move on. So it could take you 2 weeks or it could take you 2 years to finish a project.
Okay.
It would really vary how long it took you to do the course. There were people who'd been there 6 years, and I think the fastest that anyone completed it was about a year and 2 terms or something, 3 terms a year. So about 5 terms was absolutely the fastest that anyone did.
What an experience. You must have absolutely loved it, right? I mean, Florence, what a place.
Yeah, it was an amazing place. It's a really lovely place to live, let alone study there. But yeah, at the time it's weird, like classical, traditional art in that sense really sort of died out with the advent of modernism, and World War I and World War II partly killed a lot of artists that had developed those skills. But also there was a big shift in art education away from that sort of atelier system where you just learn technique and we didn't learn any sort of theory of what we were going to make. We just learned how to make classical drawings and paintings. It was just purely vocational. That type of teaching sort of went out of fashion. And into the sort of 60s and 70s, it wasn't taught anywhere in Western Europe, really. So in France, where there used to be something like 300 academies or something in the 19th century, there were none left by the 60s or 70s, 1960s or 70s. And it was actually in America that it was carried on as a tradition. So there were Americans who had studied under French masters in like the late 19th century, and they kind of carried on the tradition. And there are a few people left in the 60s and 70s, and it kind of trickled down to a tiny little stream. And by the 2000s, which was when I went and studied, there were sort of 3 schools in Florence, I believe, like 1 in London at that point, 1 in France, and a handful in America. So maybe about 15 sort of schools in total. And I think now there's probably hundreds of atelier schools, because all people from my generation who went and studied there then left and set their own schools up in different places. So it sort of exploded back out because there's a lot more interest in traditional drawing and painting.
Well, so many students are interested in kind of the art that you do, but it just seems such a world away, if you know what I mean. And you mentioned like that things are moving on and there's the advent of new art all the time. And we talked briefly about technology and the fact that most of the students now are tablet based, they love digital art, and there's all of that. And even more so now, it takes away the link to those traditional techniques, which is kind of what OCAD does teach to a point. When students come to us, we want to kind of take them back to those fundamentals. So repeat again what you mentioned to me earlier about that, because a lot of students are going to be still interested in the digital side of things, but you use that. You mentioned that you do use the digital
so
technology.
When I was younger, probably from about 12 or 13 until I was about 16 or 17, I primarily worked on a computer. So I used to use a Wacom tablet for digital painting, and I used to do a lot of 3D work as well. So like making models for games and mods and stuff like that. A lot more so than I worked traditionally until maybe I was about 16 or 17, and the equivalent of A level, I suppose, kind of GCSE A level at school. I started painting more in oils, and I did start to enjoy it a lot there. But mostly my background prior to going to Florence and studying these really traditional methods was more digital. And it was only because I really wanted to get into concept artwork and concept art for film and game or digital illustration that I went and studied in Florence, because it was recommended on forums, kind of concept art forums that I took part in. From the professionals, it was always seen as a good platform to have this traditional skill set that you could sort of, there's a big difference between working from a photo reference and working from life, and kind of understanding how to interpret life. It doesn't mean you always have to work from life, but having an awareness of how you perceive things as a human versus a camera, how a camera perceives things, helps inform your work. So even if I do work from photographs nowadays, my decision making in terms of how I interpret the photograph is based on a lot of experience from having worked from life a lot.
I understand.
It just adds this kind of extra little level of specificity that you don't get. You otherwise end up quite generic in terms of how you sort of render things. If you always work in a kind of procedural way, or a traditionally kind of comic book artists work in this kind of more constructive method. So they learn how to construct the human figure, and they do it obviously fantastically well. From imagination, they could kind of draw something from any position, but your brain can only do so much in terms of reality and kind of adding that little element of
if you've not experienced it in real life,
that a human face or a tree or anything has.
It's what I kind of am still really impressed with the exam boards that we use, to be honest, because the criteria for students is there's a big emphasis on first-hand studies. And even now they still have to reference that. And we get a lot of students saying, but it's in my imagination. I want to do it from secondary sources. I've seen it on Instagram, or I've seen it on Google Images, and that's what I want to do. But it's lovely when artists like yourself, Kieran, reinforce the importance of it. Because I think everyone we've now spoken to on these OCAD chats, we spoke to an animator, and even from their point of view, their first tip for the students kind of right back at the very beginning of their journey is to start sketching and drawing from real life, because as you say, that experience is invaluable when you apply it to whatever art discipline you end up going into.
Definitely.
Someone is writing on here, I think I recognize that name. I think she's one of our students. Were you on the Portrait and Landscape Artist of the Year? I think you mentioned, I put that in your description.
I did. Only in a heat for each. It was really good, actually. I enjoyed the landscape one more than the portrait one. Partly I'm a bit more of an experienced, I tend to do still lifes is probably my main forte, but they don't do a still life painter of the year, unfortunately. I did the landscape one year. I think they might have been the same year, actually, but they were released 1 year apart.
I see.
But the landscape one, I did a bit better, and I got to like the top 3 of my heat, and then got beaten by a really good artist, actually, who was he ended up, I think he got second in the whole thing, so I don't feel so bad that he beat me in the heat. But he was doing like stencil art. It's a really, really cool piece that he did in that episode where he did like a stenciled piece of the landscape. So he was a graffiti artist who was adapting stenciling to artworks, and I didn't stand much chance. He did it really well, and it was a really unique approach. So
but landscape, you do kind of open air, plein air kind of painting. Is that what you like doing with landscapes?
Sort of a combination. I was supposed to do a landscape show, actually, back in Australia. I haven't done an exhibition in Australia for maybe 5 or 6 years, but I try to go back because I have a little bit of a client base built up there. And I was meant to do one of, because I'm based in Sheffield in Yorkshire, I was going to do sort of Peak District Yorkshire landscapes, because my previous landscape show was, I did a residency in sort of north of the Republic of Ireland about 7 or 8 years ago now. And it was very popular because Australians like wet landscapes of like, because it's different to what they're used to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I was supposed to do a landscape show, and my general approach, which didn't go ahead because I couldn't get to Australia because of coronavirus, but my general approach is to go and create studies. This kind of goes back to that whole working from life thing, but I go outdoors and I make studies on plein air, so 2-3 hour studies maximum, where I just sit down somewhere of a scene, paint it. I try to get the colors and values down as I perceive them, because color is probably the thing that most suffers from photography versus how we individually, our own kind of subjective view of color. Color is the most subjective aspect, in my opinion, of painting. So I try to get the colors down, not be too fussed about the shapes. Sometimes they come out really well and sometimes they're a bit of a mess, but so long as I can get a color statement down in that length of time, I would then maybe do some sketches possibly, and then take photographs. And then I would create larger pieces in the studio, sort of up to like 1 meter or 2 meter pieces that are painted from my color studies plus black and white, usually black and white photos. So I'm not kind of working from the photograph colors, and sort of merge them together. So the show exhibitions that I do for landscapes are usually a mixture of the smaller studies in alongside the final pieces. So you sort of see this progression of sketches plus like pencil sketches or charcoal sketches plus color studies plus the final works. That's my kind of general approach to landscape.
Wow, cool. I mean, how do you learn like that process? Did you just develop and realize that was for you, or was there an artist that kind of inspired you that you kind of learnt from? I mean, how did you develop into knowing what worked for you in terms of?
Yeah, landscape is interesting actually, because when I studied, we would learn portraiture and figure work, and we would learn still life painting. So those aspects of my practice are very kind of set in what I learn. I mean, I've developed beyond that and I've created my own particular style to a certain extent, but I've kind of adhered to it reasonably closely. Whereas we didn't learn landscape painting at all, and landscapes are a very different sort of thing to try to work from, because when you're working in a studio and you've got a subject you're close up to, you don't have that sense of massive depth, like miles of depth plus enormous quantities of information that you're trying to like put into a piece. So it's interesting actually, people from atelier backgrounds, so the sort of background I'm from, if you look at their landscape work is really divergent, because we all created our own approaches to how we do landscapes and we weren't taught it. Obviously we have the same foundation in terms of the basic principles of painting and drawing, but then we kind of went in really different directions with landscape. So I find it quite interesting from that point of view. But my technique was probably kind of informed by reading about how 19th century landscape painters who I liked. So my preference for landscape painting are, there's a movement called the American Tonalists, so American Tonalism, which is a late 19th century, early 20th century set of landscape painters who sort of grew out of the Barbizon school in France. So the Barbizon school preceded Impressionism, but also preceded this group called Tonalism. So Tonalism is sort of opposed to Impressionism in that it doesn't really focus so much on color and focuses a lot more on value and value harmonies. And in that sense, it's more formal in the way that classical traditional painting and drawing is formal rather than color based or color theory based. And then Impressionism is more color theory based. But I do a little bit of a merge of the two. So I actually incorporate aspects of color, broken color into my painting, which is an Impressionist technique. But in general, I like the American style.
Then is really important then, like for students to read up on this, to look at all these and understand.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's this like wealth of knowledge that built up for sort of, I mean, one of the takeaways from the fact that it was nearly destroyed by the 60s and 70s in the advent of modern art education is something that was so strong and so stable for 500 years could nearly be lost. Like we were very close to losing a lot of knowledge, and we did lose stuff that we don't know how people did certain things, like tempera, for instance. The tempera recipe was lost, I think, in the 19th century. And the tempera recipe used for hundreds of years, we still don't quite know what the formula was. So people don't make tempera paints as well as they used to, because that was just knowledge that disappeared.
Okay.
So yeah, in terms of carrying that on, and there's like a principle that you get to stand on the shoulders of other people ahead of you. So if you take all their knowledge, it just makes it easier for you rather than trying to start from scratch. So, you know, all those painters that we think of as old masters were part of a kind of lineage of painters that learned from each other and helped develop the process through time. So yeah, it's
we
really
have a step in our projects. It's all about artists, and for many students, we kind of advise to start there, even though it seems like it's later on in the development. Like they get their photos and they do studies and things. But I say, but if you study the artist first, then you can apply all that knowledge right from the beginning. So we kind of we work with the students, but I think research is really important, especially to find the artist and the way of doing things, because as you say, that will inform your art. That's really cool. All right, we've got another question come through. What's your favorite piece of art you've ever done? I mean, is it sold or do you have it there? Do you have anything? What have you got?
yeah, I think my favorite piece is probably sold. Yeah, I have a piece that's part of a series, and most of them have sold, and it's probably top 2 from that series. So I did it later, but I do actually have it here, so I'll show it.
Okay, cool.
It's a bit more interesting than that.
We want to see more of your art. It's amazing.
It's hard though, so I'll see if I can get it on screen.
Yeah, we can see that. So how many of these? Well, how many were in the series?
I think I probably did about 12 or 13. So they were actually in a show in New York as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it's basically, well, it'll be an interesting thing actually for my process. So I'm just going to get the objects that are in the painting.
Cool.
So this one was painted from life, but it's what's in the painting is this horse's skull that was retrieved from the sea. So I don't have too much on the provenance of it. Part of my process, my practice is a lot of it's collecting objects to paint for still lifes. But yeah, it's a really interesting piece because it's this aged horse skull, and then it's obviously got these kind of marine incrustations on it, which just give it an amazing texture. But yeah, so that's the kind of primary object, and then it's also I've got this broken shell which sits on top.
Yeah.
So the whole principle, these pieces were quite sort of literary based, and the idea behind it is that it's based on Poseidon, because Poseidon's sort of animal that links to him is the horse is sort of a symbol for Poseidon in Greek mythology, and then obviously the shell is relevant. And then the background, so the shadow that's cast is meant to kind of slightly imitate the look of a human skull. So the shape of the shell kind of looks like a skull and a torso. So there's things to do with Poseidon was quite good at hunting people down and sort of.
I read that on your Facebook thing actually, that you like to. There's a lot of poetry or literature references in your art, right? You like to kind of make a kind of story and a purpose to what you're doing, right?
Yeah, definitely. So my process is sort of for those sorts of pieces. So there's this sort of surreal aspect to it. So in that type of work, I did this series of those sorts of paintings with kind of white gray backgrounds, and objects hovering in front of them. So they kind of sit in this space that almost hovers off the surface of the painting. And they were all based around a kind of central idea of combining objects which would seem contradictory or you wouldn't necessarily put together, and seeing what happens when you combine them. So they kind of these things that you force together into a painting, and then how the symbolism of those two objects changes by the fact they're placed next to one another. So individually they might mean one thing, but together they create a new meaning.
Yeah, something else.
And so there's this sort of slightly surreal aspect to them, and then the fact that they're just hovering in this random space, they have a surreal quality, but they are all painted. So one thing I like about them is I assemble something that looks very surreal in reality and then paint it very precisely, but they end up looking like something I've made up. So there's this kind of like duality of that aspect.
Have you always done that, or do you think that's what you're currently doing and it's kind of always evolving? Because I say to students, you'll look back at your first pieces and you will change and you will evolve over time as your experience changes and life experience and ideas and new things you've read, as you say, come into your art. Have you been the same, or have you always kind of followed this kind of concept?
For a long time, I've been really interested in still life. I would say this series is maybe the best expression of what I was trying to do prior to these pieces. So they're a bit of a distillation of all the things I'd been attempting, and they actually achieved it, which is why I would say it's one of my favorite pieces, alongside a few others from that series.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll pop up. There's a couple of others, so I'll get some proper photos of one.
We're having lots of wows, and that's really good coming through on our YouTube channel. Lots of people impressed with your stuff. Someone's writing, do you remember your first painting? That's a nice question. Do you still have it? Yeah,
I do actually have I think all my paintings I made certainly at GCSE A level, still at my parents' house in Australia.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at it I haven't been back for about 5 or 6 years, but I did look at them. I tended to actually work a lot bigger at school, so I really enjoyed doing giant pieces. And then nowadays I'm working smaller and smaller, so these are actually quite small, but I've been kind of working on miniatures. I'll show you some of them actually, because I've got some pictures of those as well. But I've got tinier and tinier and tinier as I've been going. Partly because I go to auctions a lot to try to find objects for still life. I really love miniature paint, so I collect art myself nowadays, and I love miniatures, and they're very hard to come by. And if you do find them, they tend to cost a lot at the auction. So I realized I should just start painting miniatures, because I love miniatures, and not many people do them nowadays. So I've kind of just been moving into that technically, and it's a bit of a different process to let me see. Yeah, I'll get one of these miniatures up, and then while you're looking at that, I'll try to find one of these other pieces. Yeah, this is quite an interesting one actually. Can I shrink it?
So how big is this? This is a miniature, so you're talking.
There we go. Yeah, so this one was about 7 centimeters tall, I think. Maybe only 6 centimeters tall. And this I just wanted to show because it's got a trompe l'oeil aspect. So trompe l'oeil is trick of the eye painting, for anyone who doesn't know, which is a sort of, it's existed actually in still life terms. It existed since the Roman times, actually probably Greek times technically. So there's some famous stories about some painters who did trompe l'oeil in ancient Greece, but Pompeii has a lot of trompe l'oeil, so making things look like they're actually kind of coming out of the picture plane and they exist over the surface of the painting. So this one obviously has a double frame. So the inner frame is painted, and then the petal that's kind of emerging out wraps over that frame. So these pieces are meant to kind of look, they're sort of like a trick basically. I always really like tricks in pieces. So I'll find another.
And are all these things you sell, do you do them to sell them?
Yeah, so pretty much everything I make is for sale. I don't ever really usually when I paint stuff, I'm happy to get rid of it, just because I like to make new stuff, so I don't tend to get too attached. People often ask me when I'm talking about my art to people, do you get really attached to your work, and do you want to keep it? And maybe possibly in the past, but certainly nowadays I kind of like to just get rid of stuff and
happy to share. Yeah. And is this oils as well? Someone's asking, what media do you use? Is it always?
All of these pieces are oils. I work a little bit in charcoal sometimes, but I'm always more comfortable. Yes, there's another one. So this one I think was about 7 centimeters tall or so as well. This was quite recent. I think I shipped this off maybe like 2 weeks ago or something like that. Yeah, so these are the miniatures that I'm working on anyway at the moment. So I'm getting used to those.
Kieran. So cool.
But yeah, I'll see if I can find. I should be able to find one of the other paintings from that series, a better picture.
So why oils then? Is that something that you just kind of refined over years? Is there a particular reason? Would you like say that oils is better to everyone who's starting out, or is it all very depending on the artist?
Yeah, it really depends on the artist. I think all media can be used in I mean, I've seen people who work in acrylics and I love their acrylics, or personally, I just, partly I enjoy painting because I make a lot of mistakes when I work. So I like being able to correct stuff. And when I say painting, I mean sort of oil painting or acrylics. I'm very, very bad at watercolors, just because the kind of immediacy of watercolors I always struggle a bit with. Yeah, so I like being able to edit stuff. So kind of put something in place and then edit it basically, and constantly be able to correct what I'm working on.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is probably my favorite one from this series. So this is called Moby Dick. So it's I've got this object as well. Actually, I'll get, because when I did that residency in Ireland, I found a set. I actually found about 4, but I only took one whale vertebrae. So this I collected from kind of beach combing, which I didn't know what it was when I found it, and then I realized it was a small piece of whale vertebrae from a whale bone or carcass that must have washed up. So this one is called Moby Dick. So it's based on obviously Melville's story Moby Dick, but it's got a little watch at the bottom of it, which belonged to my grandfather. So there's kind of layering of things I've collected or things that belong to him, and it's sort of to do with time, but also objects that pass through people's hand at different times. So yeah, that's probably my favorite one, but you can see how it links to the
absolutely. Oh, so many people writing lovely things. You're so talented. Wow, you're a great future ahead of you. So many lovely comments coming through. You'll see when you see this video back, Kieran. Lots of people are commenting some lovely things. So let's give some advice then to our students. We've got about 5 minutes left. So our students or prospective students, people that just want to, they look at your art and think, wow, like, where do I start? I would love to be able to do something like that. What would you say?
Yeah, I think, an obvious one is to always go back to basics. So what I often find when I'm teaching is, well, actually, probably the most important thing that I think you can say to people is something I touched on previously, which is it's okay to make mistakes and correct mistakes. And I think what often holds students back from improving is feeling like if they make a mistake, they sort of feel dejected and they won't just correct it. And they assume that anyone who's really good at painting or is really proficient never makes mistakes and they're perfect and they can just do it straight away and they're naturally talented, which isn't at all true. Everyone has to start somewhere, and the willingness to correct and make big corrections. So people often make too smaller corrections. So if I'll say, something is wrong in this way and it maybe needs to be a bit narrower or a bit taller, and in a really basic sense, they'll kind of tend towards not kind of under-correcting almost, and it's almost a bit better to push yourself to over-correct and make big changes, particularly early on in drawings. So keep things simple when you're learning to draw and paint. The simpler things are, the more it's easy to make a change. So if you're doing a drawing and you've got a simple construct, before you start putting loads of detail on, just mess around with the construct first. So those really basic shapes, and get them to work before you start laying lots of detail in, because it's always really kind of disheartening if you put loads of detail in something and suddenly you realize 3 or 4 hours later that you've made a glaring mistake in terms of what you're aiming for. So yeah, I think the main thing is don't feel bad about correcting. I think there's a misconception as well where people it's a bit of a kind of 20th century thing. I've been from a more 19th century background, but like a 20th century approach where immediacy is really important and not being confident in exactly what you do and not making a change. And I would say if that's how you want to work, that's like totally great. And there's loads of artists who work that way. But if you find that difficult and you would rather make corrections, definitely be willing to erase. Like people, a lot of the time people sort of talk down about erasing things, and like it's sort of an admission of defeat or something if you erase part of a drawing. But yeah, when I draw, I'm always correcting, and when I'm looking at stuff, and even before I start drawing or painting, my brain is going through different things I could do and whether it's right or wrong. And on top of that, if you're working from reality, if you're trying to copy something that's actually in front of you, spend more time observing than you think you would need to. So people often spend a lot of time drawing and very little time looking at the subject when they're working naturalistically. And it's always better to spend a lot of time looking and less time drawing or painting. There's a famous story about John Singer Sargent, who's a very sort of revered portrait painter from the 19th century. He supposedly would spend 2 or 3 minutes looking and then he'd do a single brush stroke, and then he would spend another 2 or 3 minutes looking, and then he would decide what brush stroke to do next, which is an extreme example, but it sort of shows you how much time you can possibly look for and just really observe the subject. So observation.
We have a whole task actually on Cezanne, and we did a big series of lessons, and it's amazing when you learn about these artists that just observed, as you say, for such a long time. Like his fruit would start rotting before he even got to start really painting it, because he'd just be sketching it for so long to try and get the exact forms and things like that. That it is really important, and we try and tell our students that we have most of the tasks at the beginning of level 2 art is observation, which for some students is highly frustrating when they're trying to learn a skill, because it can take a long time. So we kind of balance it out with doing their own style and things they enjoy, and kind of keeping the interest with looking at artists and the digital aspects, but alongside observing, because we kind of really want to push for that understanding, because when you start applying it to your art, it really does make a difference.
I mean, so I've been using Procreate, getting back into doing more digital painting. I actually do observational drawing and painting on my iPad. So I'll sit and draw something from life, but digitally. So, I mean, if you want to combine the two, it's really fun. Yeah. Working from life on an iPad is actually really, really fun, because you get this mixture of tools. You can draw and you can paint. Yeah. And they make for really good Instagram videos as well, like, because Procreate stores everything that you paint. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy watching. You can see people's process, and it's a really engaging thing to look at. So even if you're working digitally,
that's great to hear that you do that. I think we'd like to see more of that in the processes when they're planning their drawings and stuff, to actually get out these digital apps and stuff and start recording their process of planning. Yeah, absolutely. Right then, everyone is saying some lovely things. Kieran, they're shouting your name. They're loving what you're doing. You've obviously inspired quite a lot of our students. So yeah, if anyone is out there who would like to work with us, and especially Kieran, get in touch with us, because Kieran's there to help get everyone started with their Learn to Draw and Paint, especially through our YouTube channel, as I mentioned at the beginning. You do that weekly, right, Kieran? You post a video almost
during term times weekly. So only time I don't is when it's midterm and summer holidays and stuff.
Cool. So have a look. What's your website, Kieran? Where do you actually sell your stuff and promote what you do? Do you have your channel?
It's KieranIngram.com. So KieranIngram.com. So that's got my back. If you wanted to look at more of those paintings of hovering stuff, it's got all those in my archives. So it's a bit of a mixture of my archives of work, and then pieces that I've got for sale at the moment. So a selection of small pieces.
Oh, well, I'd love our students to reach out to you. I'm sure you're going to get lots of interest for wanting to be interviewed and have your work shared in their projects, so that you can just help them get going with what they want to do. So thank you so much for chatting to us, Kieran.
No worries. It's really great.
We meet you properly, because we work alongside each other but don't always get to chat. So thank you so much. If anyone is out there, get in touch with us at OCAD. miss.graham@chsonline.org.uk is me. So feel free to reach out, but you'll find all our information on all our social media channels. So do reach out. Everyone's sending kisses, lots of waves from people that have been watching. So thank you so much. And Kieran, we will talk again. We'll do something else, and we will keep our viewers up to date with what you're doing on YouTube too. Okay. Cool. Good luck with your exhibition in New York. When is that, by the way?
I think it's mid-March. It's due to open, something like that. Which I can't go. Usually I like to go across for them, but I can't go. Obviously, go for
you can't. Well, hopefully there'll be soon after another one coming up. I mean, how often do these happen? Is it a big long process, like once a year you get to do a collection, or could it be like turned over in a matter of months?
It kind of varies. So this one's I'm just doing like a couple of pieces for it, because it's a big group show of Memento Mori. So as a theme, Memento Mori is this classical thing of remember that you'll die, which is lovely. But obviously I do loads of bones and skulls, so that was partly why they reached out about it. But so this one's a group show, but for the bigger solo shows, I would say, but at least 2 years usually between solo shows, I suppose. So it takes a while to build up.
Yeah, of course, especially with the scale and the detail that you go into with your with your pieces. Well, Kieran, thank you. Good luck with the New York show, and we will touch base again, I'm sure, real soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. Thanks for joining us. Everyone's saying goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you, Kieran. Bye.